Do you think AGI could be achieved with a neural network as we understand them today?
Yes. Just flatly last. Yes. The question is whether the current architecture of stacking more transformer layers, which for all we know, GPT-4 is no longer doing because they're not telling us the architecture, which is a correct decision.
Ooh, correct decision. I had a conversation with Sam Altman. We'll return to this topic a few times. He turned the question to me of how open should OpenAI be about GPT-4? Would you open source the code? He asked me. Because I provided as criticism saying that while I do appreciate transparency, OpenAI could be more open. And he says, we struggle with this question. What would you do?
Change their name to Closed AI and sell GPT-4 to business backend applications that don't expose it to consumers and venture capitalists and create a ton of hype and pour a bunch of new funding into the area. But too late now.
But don't you think others would do it?
Eventually. You shouldn't do it first. If you already have giant nuclear stockpiles, don't build more. If some other country starts building a larger nuclear stockpile, then sure, build then, even then, maybe just have enough nukes. These things are not quite like nuclear weapons. They spit out gold until they get large enough and then ignite the atmosphere and kill everybody. And there is something to be said for not destroying the world with your own hands, even if you can't stop somebody else from doing it. But open sourcing it, no, that's just sheer catastrophe. The whole notion of open sourcing this was always the wrong approach, the wrong ideal. There are places in the world where open source is a noble ideal, and building stuff you don't understand that is difficult to control, that where if you could align it, it would take time. You'd have to spend a bunch of time doing it. That is not a place for open source, because then you just have powerful things that just go straight out the gate without anybody having had the time to have them not kill everyone.
So can we steel man the case for some level of transparency and openness, maybe open sourcing? So the case could be that because GPT-4 is not close to AGI, if that's the case, that this does allow open sourcing, or being open about the architecture, being transparent about maybe research and investigation of how the thing works, of all the different aspects of it, of its behavior, of its structure, of its training processes, of the data it was trained on, everything like that. That allows us to gain a lot of insights about alignment, about the alignment problem, to do really good AI safety research while the system is not too powerful. Can you make that case that it could be open sourced?
I do not believe in the practice of steel manning. There is something to be said for trying to pass the ideological Turing test, where you describe your opponent's position, the disagreeing person's position, well enough that somebody cannot tell the difference between your description and their description. But steel manning, no.
Okay, well, this is where you and I disagree here. That's interesting. Why don't you believe in steel manning?
I do not want. Okay, so for one thing, if somebody's trying to understand me, I do not want them steel manning my position. Mm-hmm. I want them to describe to try to describe my position the way I would describe it, not what they think is an improvement.
Well, I think that is what steel manning is the most charitable interpretation.
I don't want to be interpreted charitably. I want them to understand what I am actually saying. If they go off into the land of charitable interpretations, they're off in their land of the stuff they're imagining and not trying to understand my own viewpoint anymore.
Well, I'll put it differently then, just to push on this point. I would say it is restating what I think you understand under the empathetic assumption that Eliezer is brilliant and have honestly and rigorously thought about the point he has made, right?
So if there's two possible interpretations of what I'm saying, mm-hmm. and one interpretation is really stupid and whack and doesn't sound like me and doesn't fit with the rest of what I've been saying, and one interpretation sounds like something a reasonable person who believes the rest of what I believe would also say, go with the second interpretation.
That's steel manning.
That's a good guess.
A good
If
guess.
on the other hand, there's like something that sounds completely whack and something that sounds like a little less completely whack, but you don't see why I would believe in it. It doesn't fit with the other stuff I say. But, that sounds like less whack and you can like sort of see, you could like maybe argue it. Then you probably have not understood it.
See, okay, this is fun because I'm gonna linger on this. You wrote a brilliant blog post, AGI ruined a list of lethalities, right? And it was a bunch of different points. And I would say that some of the points are bigger and more powerful than others. If you were to sort them, you probably could, you personally. And to me, steel manning means like going through the different arguments and finding the ones that are like really the most like powerful. If people like TLDR, like what should you be most concerned about, and bringing that up in a strong, compelling, eloquent way. These are the points that Eliezer would make to make the case in this case that AI is going to kill all of us. But that's what steel manning is presenting it in a really nice way, the summary of my best understanding of your perspective. That because to me, there's a sea of possible presentations of your perspective, and steel manning is doing your best to do the best one in that sea of different perspectives.
Do you believe it?
Do I believe in what?
Like these things that you would be presenting as like the strongest version of my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe what you would be presenting? Do you think it's true?
I'm a big proponent of empathy. When I see the perspective of a person, there is a part of me that believes it if I understand it. I mean, especially in political discourse, in geopolitics, I've been hearing a lot of different perspectives on the world. And I hold my own opinions, but I also speak to a lot of people that have a very different life experience and a very different set of beliefs. And I think there has to be epistemic humility in stating what is true. So when I empathize with another person's perspective, there is a sense in which I believe it is true. I think probabilistically, I would say, in the way you think about it.
Do you bet money on it? Do you bet money on their beliefs when you believe them?
Are we allowed to do probability?
Sure, you can state a probability that
yes. There's a probability. There's a probability, and I think empathy is allocating a non-zero probability to a belief, in some sense, for time.
If you've got someone on your show who believes in the Abrahamic deity, classical style, somebody on the show who's a young Earth creationist, do you say I put a probability on it, then that's my empathy?
When you reduce beliefs into probabilities, it starts to get, we can even just go to flat Earth. Is the Earth flat?
I think it's a little more difficult nowadays to find people who believe that unironically. But
unfortunately, I think, it's hard to know unironic from ironic. But I think there's quite a lot of people that believe that. Yeah, there's a space of argument where you're operating rationally in the space of ideas. But then there's also a kind of discourse where you're operating in the space of subjective experiences and life experiences. Like, I think what it means to be human is more than just searching for truth. It's just operating of what is true and what is not true. I think there has to be a deep humility that we humans are very limited in our ability to understand what is true.
So what probability do you assign to the young Earth creationists' beliefs then?
I think I have to give non-zero.
Out of your humility. Yeah, but like 3?
I think it would be irresponsible for me to give a number because the listener, the way the human mind works, we're not good at hearing the probabilities, right? You hear 3. What is 3 exactly, right? What they're going to hear They're going to like,
Well,
there's only three probabilities, I feel like 0, 50%, and 100% in the human mind or something like this, right?
well, 0, 40%, and 100% is a bit closer to it based on what happens to ChatGPT after you RLHF it to speak humanese.
It's brilliant. Yeah, this that's really interesting. I didn't know those negative side effects of RLHF. That's fascinating. But just to return to the OpenAI closed AI.
Also, like, quick disclaimer, I'm doing all of this from memory. I'm not pulling out my phone to look it up. It is entirely possible that the things I'm saying are wrong.
So thank you for that disclaimer. So and thank you for being willing to be wrong. That's beautiful to hear. I think being willing to be wrong is a sign of a person who's done a lot of thinking about this world and has been humbled by the mystery and the complexity of this world. And I think a lot of us are resistant to admitting we're wrong because it hurts. It hurts personally. It hurts, especially when you're a public human. It hurts publicly because people point out every time you're wrong. Like, look, you changed your mind. You're a hypocrite. You're an idiot. Whatever they want to say.
Oh, I block those people and then I never hear from them again on Twitter.
Well, the point is to not let that pressure, public pressure, affect your mind, and be willing to be in the privacy of your mind to contemplate the possibility that you're wrong, and the possibility that you're wrong about the most fundamental things you believe, like people who believe in a particular God, people who believe that their nation is the greatest nation on earth, but all those kinds of beliefs that are core to who you are when you came up. To raise that point to yourself in the privacy of your mind and say, maybe I'm wrong about this. That's a really powerful thing to do. And especially when you're somebody who's thinking about topics that can, about systems that can destroy human civilization or maybe help it flourish. So thank you. Thank you for being willing to be wrong. About OpenAI. So I just would love to linger on this. You really think it's wrong to open source it?
I think that burns the time remaining until everybody dies. I think we are not on track to learn remotely near fast enough, even if it were open sourced. Yeah, it's easier to think that you might be wrong about something when being wrong about something is the only way that there's hope. And it doesn't seem very likely to me that the particular thing I'm wrong about is that this is a great time to open source GPT-4. If humanity was trying to survive at this point in the straightforward way, it would be like shutting down the big GPU clusters, no more giant runs. It's questionable whether we should even be throwing GPT-4 around, although that is a matter of conservatism rather than a matter of my predicting that catastrophe will follow from GPT-4. That is something on which I put like a pretty low probability. But also, like when I say like I put a low probability on it, I can feel myself reaching into the part of myself that thought that GPT-4 was not possible in the first place. So I do not trust that part as much as I used to. Like, the trick is not just to say I'm wrong, but like, okay, well, I was wrong about that. Like, can I get out ahead of that curve and like predict the next thing I'm going to be wrong about?
So the set of assumptions or the actual reasoning system that you were leveraging in making that initial statement, prediction, how can you adjust that to make better predictions about GPT-4, 5, 6?
You don't want to keep on being wrong in a predictable direction.
Yeah.
Like, being wrong, anybody has to do that walking through the world. There's like no way you don't say 90% and sometimes be wrong. In fact, it happened at least one time out of 10 if you're well calibrated when you say 90%. The undignified thing is not being wrong. It's being predictably wrong. It's being wrong in the same direction over and over again. So having been wrong about how far neural networks would go and having been wrong specifically about whether GPT-4 would be as impressive as it is, when I say like, well, I don't actually think GPT-4 causes a catastrophe, I do feel myself relying on that part of me that was previously wrong. And that does not mean that the answer is now in the opposite direction. Reverse stupidity is not intelligence. But it does mean that I say it with a worried note in my voice. It's like still my guess, but like, it's a place where I was wrong. Maybe you should be asking Gwern Branwen. Gwern Branwen has been like righter about this than I have. Maybe you ask him if he thinks it's dangerous, rather than asking me.
I think there's a lot of mystery about what intelligence is, what AGI looks like. So I think all of us are rapidly adjusting our model. The point is to be rapidly adjusting the model versus having a model that was right in the first place.
I do not feel that seeing Bing has changed my model of what intelligence is. It has changed my understanding of what kind of work can be performed by which kind of processes and by which means. It has not changed my understanding of the work. There's a difference between thinking that the Wright Flyer can't fly and then like it does fly. And you're like, oh, well, I guess you can do that with wings. With fixed wing aircraft, and being like, oh, it's flying. This changes my picture of what the very substance of flight is. That's like a stranger update to make. And Bing has not yet updated me in that way.
That the laws of physics are actually wrong. That kind of update.
No, like just like, oh, like I defined intelligence this way, but I now see that was a stupid definition. I don't feel like the way that things have played out over the last 20 years has caused me to feel that way.